Right on, my man. Well, we're on schedule. Let's get rolling. We got a bunch of folks on live with us, and
All right.
so I like to kind of start these off. Number one, by thanking you for giving us some of your time being here with us. And let me just put my screen here real quick. There we go. So I like to start by thanking you, but I also kind of like to start about or tell stories about how we first got connected. And I don't know if you remember this or not, but it was 2012. I believe, and it was IDEA 35, their anniversary. Jane Fonda was getting inducted into the Hall of Fame and a whole bunch of other things, and I'd never gone to one of these events before.
Yeah.
So I'm down there, and Zumba was just it was everywhere. Everybody had the gear on. There were thousands of people there. And I was like, what is with the outfits and what's going on? And I'm just kind of walking around and I'm getting overwhelmed by all this. I was working with the NSCA at their booth, and Ace wasn't too far away. And you and I ended up kind of running into each other, and we started chatting a bit. And I had read a bunch of your stuff online and was just a kind of a fan of your content that you put out in the first place. And so out of this whole experience, I wasn't real big on the Zumba craze that seemed to be kind of the dominance. I was like, the best part of this whole weekend was meeting Pete and getting to hang out with him and chat a little bit. And ever since then, we've been kind of staying in touch and, getting to chat together, and you give me the opportunity to contribute to some of your content that you put out and your articles and your podcast and such. So I appreciate it. Really appreciate the friendship and the colleague professional development opportunities that we have together. So thank you for that. And thank you for the time hanging with us today. So we appreciate it.
Sure.
If you would, just kind of give a quick little intro of yourself, anybody that might not be familiar with you that's on here with us, and we'll go from there.
So I want to say thank you, Robert. No, and I remember, it's been fun getting to know you over the years and trading the emails. And when we're together at live events, it's always fun. And I think you're right, man. I think the most interesting thing, before I give a brief background, is, have you ever been at one of the NSCA events? It was like 2005, 2011, and I don't remember if it's been since 2011. It was 2008 too, when Idea World and NSCA National were both happening at the same time in Las Vegas.
Yeah, and it was like conference week. Yeah,
it was like conference week. But at NSCA, it was all guys like you and I. Everybody, no hair, short hair, golf shirts. All these guys, waddling around, stocky guys. Yep. And then you go, 3 miles away and over to the Ideal World, and it's
whole different world. Yeah.
I always say that the fitness is kind of like a solar system, right? And we have different planets. So like the idea of commercial fitness is one planet. Yeah, bodybuilding is this whole other planet. You have the strength and conditioning world is a different planet. And so it's like we're all part of the same system, but we each have our own separate planets. So I think it's just funny to kind of be able to acknowledge that.
The 2011, that year, just I don't mean to cut you off there, that year we had, so the NSCA used to do the personal trainers conference and the tactical strength and conditioning back to back. So they would basically rent out a space for 6 days, and they would do like Friday to Sunday would be personal training, and the TSAC would be Monday through Wednesday, and then Idea was Wednesday to Sunday. So I was there for like 10 days. I think that's the year we're talking about. 10 days in Vegas, you're like, 3 days is great. Yeah, a week, 10 days in Vegas. I was like, I can't do this again. This was too much.
Especially with your business. So that's crazy. That's funny. It'll be interesting. I mean, now that so much of this stuff is going online, Robert, and I know people are doing people are really adapting to the current situation, really with online education. So I'll be really interested in seeing how the live conference, kind of what happens to it as a result, how it affects that. Well, we're not going to take a trip too much further down memory lane, but for people on the call, I'd like to say, thank you for Robert for inviting me again, and thank you all for joining us. But I've been an educator now for a number of years. I've been a personal trainer, I've been a strength coach since 2001, and a personal trainer since 1998. And for the last number of years, though, I've really been focusing on the education. My main client for education has been Nautilus and Stairmaster. The parent company is Core Health and Fitness. But I've been really developing education kind of on strength training and high intensity interval training. Nautilus is a strength brand, Stairmaster is a HIIT brand. But my main emphasis has been really trying to understand how exercise influences the aging process. So as a result, that's why I started my podcast, All About Fitness. I host the All About Fitness podcast. I post, at least try to get one new episode up, one new interview every week. So I'm trying to release 3 or 4 interviews a month, along with some other things I call quick fit tips. But the point of the podcast is to help people understand how to use exercise to slow down the aging process. And then I wrote my first book, Smarter Workouts, was generally to just learn how to exercise smarter, not necessarily harder. But my second book that I'm working on right now is actually called Ageless Intensity. It's how high intensity exercise influences the aging process. And Robert, that's something I know that Robert recently contributed to an article I'm currently developing for the American Council on Exercise, because I know that's right within, I mean, that's what you do, bud. I mean, that's your sweet spot, right?
We just got done 30 minutes ago doing it right now. So
so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to talk about some of the benefits of HIIT in general, but really some of the benefits of HIIT for the over 50 population. I mean, I turned 50 in 2 years. So, I don't plan on slowing down anytime soon. And, and I will talk about that as we get going with that. So what do you want me to do? You want me to hit share screen or?
Yeah, go ahead and hit share screen, and it's all yours, brother. And I'd love to, if you have it in your presentations, show your book on there and where people can get more information from you. That would be awesome.
Oh, I would never know what. I would never have that. I would never have that up there. So this is a presentation for everybody listening for Robert. This is, like I said, I do a lot of consulting work with Stairmaster. And so some of the stuff we're using with Stairmaster programming, and I just really want to go over, I'm calling this the overlooked benefits of HIIT, because really looking at the agenda, a lot of the things that we worry about in society, I mean, before COVID, and then there's still an issue because obviously people who are a little bit older seem to be affected at a greater rate, but we're looking at aging and cognitive decline. So what I'm going to talk about is aging and cognitive decline. I'm going to talk about the general benefits of HIIT, high intensity interval training, and benefits of HIIT for slowing down the aging process, because there are some pretty significant benefits to that. One thing I'm going to do real quick, because it's actually bothering me, is I'm going to take down the lights over my shoulder. 1 second. Try to get rid of that hot spot. There we go. Yeah, it looks a lot better. Sorry about that. I should have done that. Because if I take down this other light, it'll be too much of a shadow. All right, so we got the benefits of HIIT for slowing down the aging process, and finally go over programming solutions. And I am going to talk about some programming solutions we can do from home, because if you're like me, if you're like everybody, you've been trying to figure out what you can do and you've been answering questions about how to stay fit now that we can't access our favorite facilities and our favorite equipment. So first of all, we have to acknowledge that aging is not one single process. Aging doesn't just happen to one part of our body. It happens to all these parts of our body that we see up here on the screen. It affects our skeletal structures. It affects the nervous system, our immune system. And that's one of the reasons why, I hadn't even thought about that, but that's one of the reasons why right now this virus is having such an effect. It's probably on people who have very thrashed immune systems or weakened immune systems. Our vestibular is our balance system. Temporal is our timing, how you move, how different parts of your body move in relation to one another. Obviously, our muscular system. And the one system, it's funny, Robert, I think the one system that many people often overlook in training, but it's the one influenced by every single thing we do exercise-wise, is endocrine. We really don't hear too many people talking about, hey, I'm going to the gym today to work on my endocrine system. But every time we go to the gym, that's exactly what we're doing. And then finally, we have cardiorespiratory and cognitive. And, there's always that, and I'm going to go into some of the cool science on this, and this well, is that there's that mythology of kind of the dumb gym jock, but in reality, it's the complete opposite. People who exercise tend to have higher cognitive abilities. So real quick, I'm just throwing up some stats. This is kind of like the problem, right? Is you have to identify the problem, and then you have to talk about the solution. Is number one, we're all getting a little bit older. Nobody's going back in time. Nobody's come up with the flux capacitor yet. And if you don't know what the flux capacitor is, then you just got to do a little Google search for that.
Right. That's right.
But when you look at this, we have 1 in 10 Americans is diagnosed or 1 in 10 by age of 65 has Alzheimer's. And just so you know, and then I'll move on from this. I one time dated a woman. Let's just say that she was not an academic. She didn't realize it was Alzheimer's disease. She thought it was old timers disease. She honestly thought it was old timers, not Alzheimer's. Very, very dear woman though, but the academics was not her forte. So when you look at it, 1 in 10 over the age of 65 has Alzheimer's, and the risk of developing Alzheimer's increases with age. And this has been a big area of study because obviously we have a rapidly aging population. So most of the research is saying, what is happening? How is this affecting our brain? How is this affecting cognitive decline? And what the researchers are realizing, that exercise can play a significant role in cognitive health and reducing this cognitive decline. It's not going to eliminate it, but it can greatly reduce it. So again, projection, the reason why I put this projection up here is if we're fitness professionals, this is really our growth market, right? Is, obviously you're always going to have the younger market segments that want to look good, that, want the beach bodies and all that. But this is why I really respect and have a lot of appreciation for what you do, Robert, is that this is your market. I mean, you understand this, you identify this early on, and it's not, you're offering a very viable, probably one of the best solutions that's out there in our country, and with the type of programming that I know you're doing. And I'm not just, I'm saying that legitimately because I know the science to it.
Thank you.
But this is really where you see, so as I'm going forward, it's funny, I've been starting to work with more high school athletes, but really this has been an area where as fitness professionals, we really need to pay attention, because this is where now that people are getting into their 60s and 70s, they're retired, they have more time, and for the most part, they have more disposable income or have the ability to spend money on the stuff they want to do. So this is really where we can take that opportunity and look at where the growth of our business can be. General benefits of HIIT. HIIT, we know these things, weight loss, weight management. I don't really like, saying, we have to be a certain weight, but it's managing a healthy body weight.
Mm-hmm.
There's actually a lot of research out there that people who are underweight or really super skinny live shorter distances than those of us that carry a couple extra kgs. So, I always like to point that out, that if you enjoy your eating, you keep on rocking, because it's actually not that bad for you. But
like
it's
you weigh it in kilos too.
Well, exactly.
Only 10 kilos over.
Exactly. It's just, but but I really look at it for weight management. You want to have healthy weight management. I think we put way too much focus on weight loss as opposed to just managing a healthy body weight where you feel comfortable.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite clients one time said his whole goal for exercise is he did not want to have to buy a new wardrobe. He didn't really care about watching his eating. He's like, look, he did a lot of business dinners. He's like, I just don't want to have to buy new suits, and just keep me in my suits. We'll be fine. Perfect. I love that goal. So, people do HIIT for appearance. They do HIIT for cardiorespiratory health. But I don't think in HIIT, people like HIIT because it's challenging, it's enjoyable, and it's short. So we develop a lot of adherence. But I really don't think, again, just like nobody walks into the gym on Monday saying today's my endocrine day, nobody's really walking into the gym on Wednesday and saying today's my brain health day.
Mm-hmm.
But if we do exercise the right way, that's exactly what we can influence. We can influence brain health. Now let's look at the reality of HIIT. For those of us that are the SEC background, we know that HIIT really should be done the top way. That there should be a relatively consistent work to recovery ratio. That if we're optimally doing it, we know that if we're doing an anaerobic work interval of 10 to 30 seconds, utilizing our anaerobic, our lactate energy system of just pure energy, the ATP CP energy system, then we need about a 3 to 5 recovery to rest or recovery to work ratio. And so this is what we should see. So if we're working with an athlete, the top chart is what we should see, because we need to allow for full ATP replenishment between repetitions. But a lot of what we see in the gyms are this high volume interval training of where there's a lot of work, but relatively short recovery. So what happens is you get this dropping line, you get this decline of work rate, because HIIT training done right, we should be able to maintain the same intensity with every interval. But if we don't have enough recovery, then our intensity will drop as the intervals go on. So when we look at that, and that's where we get to common mistakes, right? It's not that nothing in fitness is bad. No tool in fitness is bad, but it's how that tool is applied is really where we sometimes get off the rails. And HIIT is definitely one of these where a little bit of HIIT is good. HIIT can be extremely effective. But just like I'm not going to use a sledgehammer to try to fix my toilet, I'm not going to use HIIT for try to get every single fitness outcome. So common mistakes are a lot of times people program with high volume and minimal rest, and that increases the risk of injury. And when you look at this, what happens if you have a lack of proper recovery, what will happen in the body physiologically is something called gluconeogenesis, meaning if the body doesn't have enough time to replace carbohydrate, to replace the ATP, cortisol will start catabolizing amino acids to convert them into glycogen for ATP. And amino acids should be used for protein replenishment, protein repair, not for energy. That can theoretically give us why we see so many quote unquote skinny fat people in the gym who do cardio for an hour at a time and go, why don't I have any muscle tone? Well, if you're doing relatively high intensity cardio and you're not supplementing with any type of glycogen or carbohydrate, or you're not recovering properly, then ultimately your body can be burning protein and amino acids. And the one thing I'll ask people is, do your clothes ever smell like amino acid or ammonia? Do you ever take that shirt off, that workout shirt, throw it in a bag and leave it in your gym bag for the day, or leave it in your car for 2 days, maybe you forget to take it out, and you pull it out to throw it in the wash. And if it smells like ammonia, that's a pretty good indicator that you've been burning amino acids for fuel, because nitrogen is a component of amino acid, nitrogen is a component of ammonia. So there's a similar smell there. So you can kind of do the smell test to think about, hey, I mean, it's after the fact, but that lets people know that they're trained at a high intensity and burning protein instead of burning fat or carbohydrate. Just one of those little physiology things.
Nice.
So here's specific benefits. We know these benefits. The one on the left that I think is really important to look at is mitochondrial density. Because what we're realizing with the aging process is that mitochondria are those little organelles in the type 1 muscle fibers, the type 1 muscle cells that help utilize oxygen for fuel. And if we can improve, there's been a lot of study about mitochondrial density for long-term health in relation to slowing down the aging process and for cellular health. Then on the right-hand side, we know that high intensity produces the anabolic hormones. We know it can increase testosterone. We know it increases growth hormone. We know that it elevates epinephrine, the catecholamines. We know the neurotransmitters. And one of the reasons why we like high intensity interval training is it's like a drug, right? It can increase our dopamine and serotonin levels as well. Just like heroin and just like other drugs, literally that's the high. Especially if we do a really challenging workout, anytime you learn a new task, you learn new motor skills, and you accomplish those, the body will release dopamine. Dopamine's kind of like, hey, you learned how to do this properly. So it's that little injection of, ooh, I feel good. I did the kettlebell swing right. My coach said I did the kettlebell swing right. You get that little burst of like, I feel good. That's dopamine. So all these things are adding up to, these are the benefits. And now the bottom, the last one, lactate to BDNF, is some of the research on high intensity exercise has found that the same high intensity exercise that elevates levels of lactate, that elevates levels of growth hormone and mechanical growth factor, also elevates levels of BDNF. And BDNF is brain-derived neurotrophic factor. That's a protein in the brain. I'll talk about that in a couple minutes. But these are all like specific benefits of HIIT. And we know that one of the biggest benefits of HIIT compared to steady state cardio is activation of type 2 muscle fibers and muscle motor units. And especially for an aging population could go for a long walk. And that's actually one of my fears about right now is I see a lot of people walking for exercise right now, but are they getting the high intensity exercise they need or should be doing on 2 or 3 times a week to maintain these important benefits? Because the other thing about activating type 2 motor units is it gets into the nervous system and helps your body become more neurologically efficient. So all these things are critically important for everybody, but even more so as we age, as we get a little bit older. And so how fitness happens, exercise, and we always have to remember this, exercise is stress on the tissues. And right now it's really important to pay attention to stress. If you're working with clients via Zoom, if you're doing online training, online coaching, one of the things to really ask about is their stress levels. How stressed are people right now in this certain environment? Because if they're kind of in a catabolic state, we don't want to thrash them anymore by loading extra exercise stress on them. But if people are relatively chill and like, hey, it is what it is, then we can kind of push them to work a little bit harder. Because there are basically 2 types of overload that affect the body, that affect muscle growth. One is mechanical overload, and mechanical overload is to damage the actual structures. Mechanical overload from strength training, we know this. You damage the proteins. There's a signal to the fibroblasts and the growth factors to repair the damaged muscle tissue. That's mechanical overload. You use a heavy weight or you go to fatigue to damage the structures. That initiates the repair process. Metabolic overload is you work to a point of fatigue. And the interesting thing is in the research is, you cannot isolate metabolic overload, because if you do a metabolic overload, you do create some mechanical damage on the structures. And likewise, you can't isolate mechanical damage, because if you do enough work to influence mechanical damage on the protein structures, you're also depleting metabolic, the metabolism. Now, here's one way that I think people don't realize that muscles grow is that when you work to fatigue, what you're doing is you're depleting levels of glycogen in the muscle cells, especially the type 2 muscle cells that store glycogen. And this is the one time, I always point this out, Robert, this is the one time I'll give Tracy Anderson credit for being partially right, except I doubt very seriously she would be able to explain why. because Miss Anderson, I don't know if people know who she is, but she's one of these fitness charlatans. Tracy Anderson will say that spinning will make your legs big, which it can, because if you're doing high intensity indoor cycling all the time and you're depleting glycogen levels in the thighs and in the quadriceps, well, the compensation is the quadriceps are going to store more glycogen. Glycogen holds on to water. You know, we get, I think it's like 1 molecule of glycogen holds on to 3 or 4 molecules of water. So you look at, or you look at that. So people that are out there trying to do exercise for weight loss and are going to fatigue all the time, they're actually initiating muscle hypertrophy if they're resting and recovering the right way. So I just, it always strikes me as funny is she says spinning will make your legs big, and I'm like, I don't think she could explain the physiology of that.
I had a couple of clients that they would make the same comment. They're like, I don't want to squat and lunge and do all this stuff because I can't fit in my jeans. And I would talk about muscle striation and then the retention with this, and why, if you ever watch like bodybuilders pump up, they don't do anything with their legs. It's all upper body stuff because the striation, the muscle fibers, etc. And they're like, what about my jeans? And I'm like, just wait 2 days after you do your leg workout and you'll kind of be back to normal. And once we kind of had that discussion, they're like, oh, it's just like almost like swelling to an extent, like it's a different muscle fiber activation, more or less, that you're working with here, from a pinnate fiber to striated fibers and such. It just, once you have some kind of explanation behind some of these things, I think that's some of my big hangups with some of the experts in the field is they can't explain the whys. And so I was waving off the whole discussion on that, going, I'm not gonna touch that one. But
it's funny when I was going through doing some of the work on Nautilus, I was going through some of old. I bought some of the old Nautilus texts that were available on Amazon, and Arthur Jones was, he was the guy who created Nautilus, but he had this protocol where he would bring people out to Florida, bring bodybuilders out to Florida, and say, look, I'll guarantee you'll get an inch in size and muscle size when we train. And the Jones protocol was do 1 set to fatigue, or 1 set of each exercise to a point of fatigue, and then rest for 2 or 3 days. Well, what happens during the rest period is your muscles store glycogen, your muscles will store extra water. So sure enough, they would do 1 workout. The bodybuilder would go, why don't we go back in the gym? And Jones would be like, no, rest for a few days. And after 3 days of rest, the muscle would be half an inch or an inch larger because the compensation from the storing glycogen and the retaining water in the muscle. Nice. So it's interesting. Just if you understand the physiology, you can kind of manipulate really well. But a large point, I think a lot of people are walking around chronically overtrained because if they're always exercising at a high intensity, they're not allowing the glycogen to replace completely in the muscles. And one of the things I think one that I've done a couple media interviews about right now, what people should be doing for exercise. And one of the things I've been telling reporters is, like, think of this as a few weeks of active recovery. Mm-hmm. Because people who go to gyms, in my opinion, are chronically overtrained. Like the hardcore exercise enthusiasts are chronically overtrained. So right now, if all they could do is body weight exercises at home, you know what? Look at that as a form of active recovery. So what if you gain a pound or two? Unless the Olympics are already canceled for the year. And so unless you're trying to get ready for the Olympic trials, there's no need to really stress about being at a certain elite level. Yeah. That's just people, you just have to realize that, hey, just use the time for what it is. Use the downtime.
Dan John has a great quote. It's in Can You Go? In one of his books. And he says, for the chronically overtrained, undertraining feels wrong. And so we've got that mindset of like, I have to gas every day. I have to push every day. You know what I mean? And so you get into that just like you're saying, this constant fatigue state where you don't even get to reap the benefits of the work you're putting in. You know what I mean? So this is a great opportunity for some people to really experience that.
Well, especially for a lot of our clients over the age of 40 or 45, right? Yeah. There's absolutely nothing wrong with high intensity exercise for people in their late 40s, 50s, or 60s, but it should be limited to 2, maybe 3 days a week. I would say 2 days a week for sure, 3 days a week if they're getting great nutrition and great nutrition, great sleep, and great recovery. Just because it's like, but it doesn't mean don't exercise the other days. It just means you don't have to go to the point of where you're going to gas yourself. You don't need to gas yourself every day. And I think I love Dan's system of the red light means don't train, yellow light means train at a lower to moderate intensity, and green light means go. All systems rock and roll. And I think that's a very very systematic application of it. Then when we look at it, so I always point out here, what I like to do is point out is the SAID principle, specific adaptations to impose demands, is just the third law of physics. For every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like years ago, I realized, I'm like, wait a minute, all the SAID principle is just, it's a variation of the third law of Newtonian physics of
Love it.
every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. For every, the way we train is the way our muscles adapt. The stimulus we put into the body is how the body responds. And that's really where, the other parts of the slide, repetitive demands, if people are doing the same exercises over and over again, after a period of time, 8, 12, 16 weeks, we know this is general adaptation syndrome. The body's going to adapt, and they're going to have relatively, any extra load is not going to make any significant changes. But if you have variability, meaning one workout you maybe use the rowing machine, maybe another workout you go for a run outside and do sprint intervals, and maybe the next workout you do jump rope intervals, you can still do the same HIIT protocol. Like say you do a Tabata on each one of those, you're just doing different demands on the system and using muscles differently. And that's really what there's some really cool science to show that variability can lead to optimal adaptations, in terms of putting different loads into the body. And consistent variability is kind of the idea of nonlinear or undulating periodization, of where you have some consistency between high intensity, low and moderate intensity days, because that's what really allows adaptations to occur. Because you can have a high intensity day followed by, if you do a HIIT workout today for 20 minutes, you just gas yourself, then maybe tomorrow do a yoga class, or maybe tomorrow do a body weight TRX class, of where you're working hard, but you're not going to the same level of intensity. And I'm not saying that you don't work hard in yoga, but you're just working differently, and it's a different type of hard work.
Yeah.
And just
not
being
maxing out on your strength lifts those days either.
Yeah, you're not going to mass out the stress. You're not going to overstress yourself. I mean, yoga can still be challenging, but it's a completely different type of challenge than doing a 20-minute HIIT workout.
Absolutely.
And it's that type of variability that we want to get into. So here's how HIIT happens. HIIT is very energy expensive. When we do a high energy workout or a workout, we deplete our ATP. That's a chemical in muscle cells. And muscle cells only store about 8 to 12 seconds, give or take, of immediate ATP. The immediate byproduct of that is an increase in hydrogen and an increase in lactic acid. So a lot of times you'll hear people say, well, it's increase in lactic acid. It's like, not necessarily. That's just what they can measure. But now that we get better instrumentation, better measurements, it's an increased acidity of hydrogen ions. So that's really that burning sensation. But that's really what you should realize is when you do exercise and you feel that burning, that's an indicator. If you get good sleep, your growth hormone levels will be up, and your testosterone levels will be up. Because anytime you elevate lactic acid, there's really, your body should have a higher anabolic response. So the recovery interval, and this is where, again, a lot of programming in fitness gets it wrong. We need the recovery interval, because the work interval, say we're doing Tabata protocol, and we're doing a 20-second Tabata protocol. That 10 seconds is barely enough time to replace energy. In fact, it won't replace energy. So if you do 1 4-minute Tabata protocol, that's really all that needs to be done. And if you are going to do more than 1 4-minute Tabata protocol in a workout, it should be for different muscle groups or different movement patterns, because you need time to replace that energy. Because the work interval itself is anaerobic, but the recovery interval is aerobic to replace it. Because and that's what people don't realize, is people don't realize that during that rest interval, your body is working aerobically to get rid of the metabolic byproduct, remove the lactic acid, remove the hydrogen, and replace, to synthesize either probably glycogen, because it's quicker. Anaerobic glycolysis quicker to replace that ATP. So it really is, your body is working during that recovery interval. And it just is, you have to use energy to replace energy. And that also gets into the idea of the afterburn, the EPOC, the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption. And that's a real effect. The body is burning extra calories after exercise, but it's not that much. And what I like to point out to people is, what do you think most people do after a HIIT workout? I'm holding up my cup of coffee right here. They leave your facility. They go next door to the coffee shop. They get a Frappuccino and a muffin. Well, if you look at the calorie boards in California, a Frappuccino and a muffin are like 900 calories. Well, your body, EPOC might be maybe 150 to 200 calories over the course of 24 hours, maybe, if you, depending on lean muscle mass. So EPOC does not have a significant amount of you're burning more calories than rest, but it's not a significant amount. It doesn't mean you can go out and have that 900 calorie snack right after HIIT workout. And people wonder, why is my training not having an having an influence?
We used to think, sorry to cut you off, but
No, please
we
do.
used to think the epoch was a lot longer, right? Didn't we used to think it was like 48 hours and now it's like 8 to 16 or something like?
Well, and there have been different studies. I mean, basically what they're looking at is they're looking at baseline of homeostasis, right? Homeostasis, like we're sitting right now, is our resting oxygen consumption. So if we have a really, and for listeners, we burn about 5 calories we burn 5 calories of energy to use 1 liter of oxygen. And that's one thing I always point out to people, because anything that we do that increases oxygen consumption theoretically increases energy expenditure.
Gotcha.
And here's the real kicker: anything you do above resting metabolism is technically metabolic conditioning. We always say metabolic conditioning for this high intensity stuff, but in reality, what's that?
Anything above?
Well, if you go, because if you go above resting, now your energy metabolism is going to, you're going to be using one of your metabolic pathways to produce energy even if you're going for a walk around the block.
Gotcha.
That's just low intensity metabolic conditioning. Because anytime your metabolism is working to produce energy for physical activity, theoretically, I'm being theoretically, I'm being dorky on that.
Yeah.
But when you look at that, but oxygen availability determines fuel utilization. So at lower intensity, like right now, listening to this webinar, we're in our fat burning zone, right? Mm-hmm. And obviously, if we have more lean muscle mass, our body might be more effective at using oxygen convert to oxygen and free fatty acids to energy. But when we start working at a higher intensity, the body needs energy quicker. The body needs energy available faster. And so what it will do is use glycogen and use ATP, PC, the adenosine triphosphate and phosphocreatine. Mm-hmm. And again, that's really where that's this whole idea is we don't need to do HIIT with every workout. Some workouts we should do at a lower intensity steady state and work on our aerobic metabolism, while other workouts, if I do a really hard workout today, HIIT training today, I should go for a steady state run or bike ride tomorrow because that'll help me metabolize the leftover metabolic byproduct from today's HIIT workout. It's being smart about it. The one thing about HIIT is we know we get more net calories expended per workout because our oxygen consumption goes up. If you hear something in the background, I have a bulldog sleeping in a crate behind me. So
we're all good.
I didn't know. I can hear her snore. I can hear her snoring behind me.
I've noticed it too. Like I have I got a Rode mic, the company Rode, and I can hear everything. Like I can hear the chirping outside. I can hear my kids in the room. But if you don't have we can't hear any of that. Okay. But you can hear it with your headset on. I know what you mean. I'm like, I can hear you guys whispering, and I'll ask people, and they're like, we didn't hear anything. So
it's interesting what mics can pick up.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is what I like to point, because again, a lot of people, and this is where a lot of people, they study this stuff, right? We study this stuff when we're taking our certification. We may have studied this stuff in college, but then we get out and we start programming, we start working with clients, and we just, I don't want to say, it's just we get caught up in what we're doing day to day. And so I really appreciate, one of the things I really appreciate what you're doing, Robert, is you're giving a chance, now that we're not as busy, is you're giving some people a chance to kind of brush up on their, oh, okay, yeah, that's right, and kind of like refresh the memory of this. Because if you look at this slide, this is the vertical axis is our volume of oxygen per minute. That's the amount of liters per minute we use. Remember, 5 calories per liter of oxygen used. And if we look at work intensity, that's a horizontal chart of it. And as we see, as work intensity increases, our body will use more oxygen. And the first ventilatory threshold, or VT1, is that point of where now we're expiring. Your body below VT1, your body's burning primarily free fatty acids, and then there's really no metabolic byproduct from that. I mean, there is, but nothing's going to influence breathing. When you start working harder and your body starts burning more carbohydrate, one offset or one output of carbohydrate metabolism is an increase in carbon dioxide. So that first ventilatory threshold is that point of where the body is going from using oxygen or using free fatty acids to using carbohydrate or glycogen for fuel. And so if you have clients that want to kind of optimize fat burning, and here's the other thing, some of the research on fasted cardio is actually pretty interesting, is because if you do fasted cardio first thing in the morning, you have a higher level of cortisol naturally because you're using more cortisol to help your body wake up, and it can have a greater effect on fat burning if you stay below VT1. Because if you start working too hard, your body's going to naturally start using more carbohydrate for fuel. So there is some science behind the gym mythology of fasted cardio. And then above VT1 is when we start burning carbohydrate for fuel. And above VT1 can be aerobic glycolysis. And VT2, the second ventilatory threshold, is where you start getting to anaerobic glycolysis. That's use of glycogen without oxygen. And then above VT2 is where you start getting that onset of blood lactate. Because if you're using glycogen, if you're metabolizing glycogen for fuel, your body is naturally going to be producing more hydrogen ions as a result, and that's where blood acidity increases. That's why one of the reasons why we can sustain high intensity work for only a brief period of time is we start getting that increase in acidity in the blood, which that's that burning sensation we feel. I mean, this is what we do, right? But we just forget this sometimes.
In the transition here, just to kind of ask, because these are the things, in all honesty, like this is the stuff that I had the hardest part kind of understanding, was the transition of the systems. When you quote unquote get your second wind, like you're 3 or 4 rounds into a workout, the first couple bouts are just really taxing you and gassing you. You feel almost this point where you're like, okay, I'm starting to level off now. Like I'm working, we're transitioning to this new, energy system at this point, right? Is that kind of that transition to phase 2?
Yeah, and that's where there are a number of things happening with that, right? Because part of it is, and here's something crazy, right? I was trying to promote an article on cannabis and exercise. Your body has a natural cannabinoid system, and cannabinoids, you have a natural cannabinoid in your body which can help. One of the reasons why CBD is so popular is you have a natural CBD receptor in your body which limits pain. So at a certain point, when you start reaching that pain threshold in your body, you'll start releasing some cannabinoids as a pain suppressant to reduce pain. So that's sort of what you're feeling when people are like, when you get that second wind, if you will, you are kind of releasing some of those. You're releasing some of those things that decrease pain. But the other thing is just your body is becoming more efficient. And then here's the thing that we have to remember: like if you're doing a really hard lower body, say you're doing like jumps for 30 seconds, doing jumps for 30 seconds, you're going to be fatiguing those lower body muscles. They're going to be working anaerobically, while your upper body and core muscles might be working aerobically because they're not working as hard. And then if you go from doing a lower body thing to maybe you're doing the heavy ropes, and if you can see, I'm flashing my arms up and down, but now the lower body is working aerobically to recover, while the upper body is working anaerobically to do that. And that's really where you can kind of alternate this. And with your programming, Robert, I know you do that, but that's just sort of what's happening, and that's where your body will kind of kick in.
Yeah.
But also too, that second wind is dopamine, serotonin, all these things. So those chemicals are being produced in the brain where we feel good. Now, because think about it too. I mean, we all know this, right? That first 8 to 10 minutes of any workout kind of sucks, especially if you're a little bit tired. But what happens after 8 to 10 minutes? Boom, you start feeling good. Oxygen's flowing. Your pain levels are being managed. Just it's basically a whole cornucopia of chemistry going on in your body when we exercise.
We saw it in a couple of different, we did this with our older pops. We have like 2 groups that are 60 and over for the most part. They're on average, they're right around late 60s, early 70s. And I would do a Tabata format with them. And we were scaling or requesting an RPE from them after every set based on the number that they were achieving. So basically, if we were doing a jam ball slam or whatever it was, they would do 8 in the 20 seconds. And then I would say, how hard was that? And they would call it was a 10. They went as hard as they could. And then on the next one, they get the same number. They would achieve 8 again, but it was maybe an 8 this time, and then an 8 again, and then an 8 again. And by the time the workout was getting towards the end of that Tabata cycle, their perceived exertion on a 1 to 10 RPE, it came down a bit, but they were still achieving the same numbers they started with in the beginning. So it was kind of, as going through, I always like to give whys of like why these things are happening and why they're coming through. So that's why I'm kind of asking along this, like that second wind kicks in, you start to get this comfort level more or less of the effort you're putting out, and your body seems to run much more efficiently than right out of the gate, first activation, of getting things rolling.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. And it's a whole bunch of things popping in there, and a lot of that has to do with coaching too, right? How the language we use and the expectations we set is because of, to that point, if we tell people, hey, you should get between 8 and 12 reps during 20 seconds, then they know that it kind of sets that expectation and gives them a specific work guideline. Here's just another chart of the energy pathways, right? And this is the physiology, and this would be if we were training somebody for a competitive sport. Like when we look, I always like to use the example of the 100-meter sprint. A 100-meter sprinter, a good 100-meter sprinter is not going to run 3 sprints within 20 minutes. We know that. A 100-meter sprinter might take 40 minutes to warm up, They run the 100-meter sprint in 10, 10 and a half, 11 seconds if they're, collegiate, whatever level, sub 10 if they're world class. But they're doing this, and then they have going to have another couple hours before their next race. So there's a lot more. And if they're doing a practice, they might run a 100-meter sprint or a 60-meter at 100% effort. But then there's going to be a longer recovery period because they want to work at their hardest effort. So this is the science of what we know of how we should recover. But this is also why, too, when we come to programming, we should only programming high intensity training in 4 to 6 minute blocks.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll talk about that a little bit more in programming. I don't if I'm doing a high intensity interval workout, I try not to program longer than 6, maybe 8 minutes. If I'm working with people that I know are really well conditioned, I might do an 8-minute block of HIIT, but then we're going to have a 5 to 10 minute block of lower intensity, kind of core training or body weight training to recover from that 6 to 8 minute really high intensity block. Because we have to respect, this is what we know about the physiology. These are the work recovery ratios that we should adhere to. So you can do higher intensity classes, but you should program at about 4 to 6 minute blocks of high intensity, 4 to 6 minutes of high intensity, followed by 4 to 6 minutes of relatively low intensity, and then you go back to high intensity just to respect the fuel sources.
Now when you look at the 4 to 6 minutes, are you talking about total work time or undulation time?
Total work time.
Okay.
Well, no. Like a period. So like it'd be like, say we're going to do a 5-minute Tabata period, and I'll talk about what that looks like in a minute. And then we could do like 5-minute just core training where I'm not going to push you to work hard, where it might be we're going to do 45 seconds of a plank, 45 seconds of a side plank, but just that way, because I know what you mean. I'm not talking about 5 minutes of total like 20-second intervals. I'm just talking about 5 minutes total accumulated,
okay, good.
Including the recovery. So that's a great question. So again, here's that chart again, but showing where about the energy pathways come in. So below VT1 is free fatty acid oxidation. Right at VT1 is aerobic glycolysis. Right around the second ventilatory threshold is anaerobic glycolysis. And at the highest level is just ATP-PC. So it gets into our fuel utilization. And this is really why this is important for older adults as we age, right? This is how we can elevate levels of growth hormone and growth factors. I've seen it written as insulin-like growth factor. I've seen it written as mechano growth factors. So I'm just labeling them as growth factors. But growth factors are, the interesting thing is they kind of elevate in the body after exercise in response to carbohydrate. So that's one of the benefits about taking carbohydrate post-exercise is it can elevate levels of insulin-like growth factors because the growth factors respond to the introduction of carbohydrate like insulin. They elevate with the introduction of carbohydrate. But what growth factors do is they work with growth hormone for mechanical restructuring of the muscle fibers. I'm going to go back up. The growth hormone is a peptide hormone that works on the nucleus of a cell. Growth hormone can help with the uptake of amino acids, and growth hormone can help with fat burning. Lipolysis is fat oxidation. And this is one of the things, one of the reasons women will produce more growth hormone in response to high intensity interval training because testosterone is produced in the testes. So when you look at the physiology of this, testosterone is produced in the male testes. Males make about 10 to 30 times more testosterone than females. Females will make testosterone in their ovaries, but at a much smaller ratio. So the reason why I'm spending a minute on growth hormone is it has a much bigger effect on women. And there's one reason why women in their 40s, 50s, and 60s can have a great response to strength training is they're going to be elevated levels of growth hormone, which is much more effective at fatty acid oxidation than doing 50 minutes of steady state cardio. And plus at the same time, they're stimulating growth of muscle fibers. So this is really, that's what we know in the science. But anecdotally, Robert, I don't know how many times I've had women come up to me in their 40s and 50s who've like, I've started doing weight training. And, oh my God, I finally have the body I've wanted. That for years they were doing 50 minutes of cardio, doing all this, but now they're going weight training 2, 3, 4 times a week. And they're like, oh my God, I don't know why I was scared of weights all these. You've probably heard that all the time, right?
All the time. Oh yeah.
And it's just, so it's like, and so then, and that's what I try to get, with women in my demographic, 40s and 50s, is like, if they're not already doing strength training, do strength training. Unless you have testes, which I don't think they would, your body just isn't going to produce the testosterone to blow up overnight. And women see these images of female bodybuilders. Well, we all know they're supplementing with exogenous androgens, and a lot of them are supplementing with androgens. And it's it's funny. So when you look at this, so growth hormone is produced as a result of strength training and metabolic and mechanical fatigue, but growth hormone along testosterone are produced during the REM cycles of sleep. So I don't know about you, Robert, But one of the things I've started asking people, or what I have asked people on like Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, is what are you doing tonight? What are your plans for tonight? Because if they have, say they have concert tickets, shares in town, they're going to go out to dinner and a concert. Well, I'm going to say maybe today shouldn't be your hardest workout. I want you to work hard, but don't thrash yourself today. Because if you have concert tickets, you're probably going to go out and have an extra drink or two at dinner. Or we're in California, maybe they have a little THC before they go to the concert. God bless them. It's legal here. And, but they're not going to get great sleep because they're going to be staying out later than normal. They're going to be amped up, having an extra cocktail or two. And so that's not going to be the day I want them to train their hardest. But if you come in to a Saturday class and you're like, hey, what are your plans tonight? I don't have any plans. I think we'll just kind of hang out at home. Well, then it's like, yeah, rock and roll. You know what I mean? Because then you can have a much better sleep. Nice. And I think, we got to think ahead as coaches. We got to start thinking like, okay, we're getting ready to do a hard workout. I have a really hard workout program today. But first, before we go, what are your plans tonight? Do you have big plans, or are you just going to be hanging out tonight? Because if you have big plans, I don't want you to push your hardest, right? Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah, because that is just
you get the same response. Gary Schofield, the strength coach, he works with Play now, but we used to work at a Christian Catholic school in Atlanta, and he had this great program that he would text all the athletes and ask them, do you have a test today? Are you going out with your parents or your girlfriends? And like he would look at their weekly responses of when their higher energy outputs were for stimulus for school and then their social life. And then he would implement their max training components and all on the days that were off of that. So it's the same thing, like when they're going to get more rest, when they're not going to be stressed for the test they have to do or a final. And he created this whole thing and then worked with a software company to actually make that to where all the kids could go and like input their schedules. He saw so much value and such a great response with that it's now a thing. Like it's a software that that people would utilize. It's very cool. And I don't think we give nearly enough response or attention onto that system and the recovery components, your stress cortisol levels that come from like a state we're in right now, right? Where everybody's freaking out about their business and all. I mean, there's a lot of different pieces that go into that. And all we think of as the coach is the 60 minutes I have in front of you. You know what I mean? That's
exactly. And think about what a lot of people do in the gym too, right? Is they might go out with friends on a Friday night. They might have people over for dinner on Friday night, and maybe they had an extra cocktail. Maybe instead of going to bed at 10 like they normally do during the week, maybe they go to bed at 11:30 on a Friday night. But then they come into the gym, so they've had an hour less of sleep. They come into an 8 o'clock class in the gym, and they slam themselves at 8 a.m. on a Tabata class for an hour. And then at that night, they go out again with their friends. And, it's like, that's not optimal alignment, where it's really, I would want somebody coming into the gym on a Saturday, do a yoga class on a Saturday and slam yourself on a Sunday, because Sunday you'll probably go to bed at 9:30 to get ready for the week. Yep. Well, if you're 10 o'clock, 10:30 is your normal bedtime, and you go to bed at 9:30 on a Sunday, well, shoot, I'm going to try to slam you on a Sunday morning because I know you're probably not going out and having a couple extra cocktails on a Sunday night. It's being smart about when we're teaching. Yeah. So I'd look at like maybe Sunday, Monday, Sunday through Wednesday would be our harder training days, whereas Thursday, Friday, Saturday would be the days of like, hey, still move, but not jam you as hard, not, a little bit more active recovery.
I love it.
Yeah, that's at least, kind of respecting the physiology. So looking at brain-derived neurotrophic factor, BDNF, that's a protein which keeps our neurons young and healthy, right? It increases, the cool thing is it increases neurogenesis, formation of new cells in the brain. And I forget, it's angio something, which increases the, just like we create new capillaries in our muscles when we exercise will create new blood vessels and new blood flow in the brain. So really there's been a lot more research on this. And the research is showing that exercise can elevate levels of BDNF and oxygen flow to the brain. And just one study alone saw that aerobic exercise 2 times a week can reduce the risk of dementia by 50%. This is why, I don't know, and I'll talk about this in a couple minutes. And just to do a plug, I was telling Robert earlier, I am posting my podcast interview with John Medina today. So John Medina wrote Brain Rules. He wrote Brain Rules for Babies and Brain Rules for Aging Well. And I interviewed him for the All About Fitness podcast, and that's going up this afternoon. So it's a really good discussion on exercise, brain physiology. And I booked him as a guest in February, way before COVID, and we ended up talking a little bit about the socialization, because one of the most important things for the brain throughout aging is the social interaction. And so there's a lot of research that social interaction is as critical. And that's why I love what you're doing with the group training with your population. Is getting somebody in their 70s to a group fitness class is as much about the socialization as it is about the exercise. It's a win-win.
I have 2 clients I went and saw yesterday, just because they are very down in this period. They're both living by themselves, widows, and I'm chatting to them from the driveway, but they're like, I miss the exercise. I love doing the online stuff with you, but I miss everybody else. Like that was their thing to do 3 days a week. Was it got them out of the house. They would go hang with their buddies afterwards. It's such a big piece, and we don't take that. Now you've got a health component that is beyond just, having somebody hang out and talk with. You see there's real result that comes to that. That's such a big part of what we're doing too. So yeah, you're right on with that.
And one of the things Medina talks about is, they actually did research when they took a group of seniors, older adults in a facility, and they had them interact with people via Skype. And they found that over the study period, they interacted via Skype. They had higher, their responses were better than people that didn't. So even this type of socialization, even if we're socialization via FaceTime, Zoom, that's better than not socializing at all. Being person-to-person contact is best. Person-to-person socialization is best for our brain development and just overall health. But even this interaction right now is better above baseline. So it's really cool stuff about that. A couple more studies on exercise and BDNF, and what they're seeing is that whenever they'll give a study group a cognitive test, they'll do the exercise intervention, then they do the cognitive test at the end, and they score better on the cognitive test after the exercise intervention. And there's been the bottom study here they had 4 groups. They had 80% of heart rate reserve, 60% of heart rate reserve, and they did it for 20 minutes and 40 minutes. And the vigorous and moderate for 40 minutes, the longer period had a better response on BDNF than the shorter periods. Now that study, it was only 45 people, and they're 15-year-olds. They're 18 to 25-year-old males. But what they saw was that the longer, more intense exercise had better response for BDNF. There's also been studies on the impact of HIIT training on BDNF, and what they found is HIIT may be a more powerful stimulus for elevating serum BDNF in the blood compared to moderate intensity exercise. And that's really, this is really powerful stuff, right? Is because it's like, hey, so if you look at the multifactorial, we're burning calories, we're enhancing our type 2 muscle fibers. We are now also realize there's a cognitive benefit just of physiology, but then if you put the socialization into it, that really is where things can become very powerful. And there's also been research on this of where HIIT for shorter intervals can actually be more pleasurable. People would rather do a 20-minute HIIT class than like a 50, 60-minute steady state class. You know what I mean? When they do a 20 to 30-minute HIIT class, they know they're going to get over with. They know it's going to be hard. It's going to be short. It's going to be really hard. It's going to be challenging, but it'll be over before you know it. And that's really where there's actually some interesting research on that. And the bottom one here, and this is what I want to put in here right now, this research, Robert, was published in 2018. And what it did, it had 3 groups. It had one group that ran on a treadmill. They did a 4-minute Tabata protocol on a treadmill. You had another group that did a 4-minute Tabata protocol body weight exercises. Then you had a third group that did a 30-minute steady state moderate intensity treadmill work. So the first 2 groups did 12 minutes of work a week. The third group of 30 minutes on the treadmill did 90 minutes of work a week. And what they found was that the 2 Tabata groups got much better results in 12 minutes a week than the treadmill group at 90 minutes a week. The 4 minutes a week on the treadmill had the highest results, but the 12 minutes a week on the treadmill had the highest results. The 12 minutes of the week of the body weight training had was really close to the treadmill. And the 12 minutes a week of body weight training was better than the 90 minutes a week of steady state training. Mm-hmm. So I want to put that in here for people right now at home, because if you can't do your favorite workout, gas yourself. And that research, the exercises they did mountain climbers, burpees, they did squat thrusts with weights, and they did something, and I forget what the other exercise was. But if you come up with a 4 exercise circuit, and you do each exercise twice in a 4-minute Tabata, and you push hard. You have to be out of breath in that 4 minutes. That can be, according to this research, it can be, it was a 16-week study too. So it was a longer study period than 8 or 12 weeks. And so it's pretty, it's not, it doesn't, and I'll say this right now, research doesn't prove anything, but it just shows that there's some evidence that apply the variables the right way, you should get an outcome that you want. So models that work, we're talking about Tabata and modified Tabata. Variable duration interval training means we do at different lengths. And these are two that I've been having some fun with, are the Copenhagen protocol, the 30-20-10, and ladders, of where you do like 20 seconds of work, 40 seconds of recovery, 30-30, 40-20, that's climbing the ladder, then you come back down. I mean, that's 6 minutes, right? So this is between 4 and 6 minutes of programming. And this is what I've started doing with some classes is we'll do 2 minutes of Tabata, and then we'll take 1 minute off. We'll do like 1 minute of like balance training, and then we'll finish the 2 minute Tabata. So what we're doing is we're doing a 5 minute Tabata protocol instead of 4 minutes. But that way, what I want all the Tabata intervals, to your point earlier, I want all the work intervals to be at a relatively high intensity. But if I've found that if we try to go straight through, that last minute looks like crap. I'd rather give you a minute break in the middle, or I'll do this in a cycling class where we do 2 minutes of really hard. We do a standard 2 minute Tabata, and then we'll do 1 minute steady state, and then we'll finish the 2 minute Tabata. It's just giving people a little break, right? I mean, we're not working with an athletic population, and I don't want to slam people into the ground. But this is how I'll finish a 40 or 45 minute cycling class, is I finish with a bout of HIIT, because part of it too is psychology, is I want people walking out of a class feeling like the class is really hard. I don't need to slam them to a wall for an entire 45-minute workout if I make the last 5 minutes really hard. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Yeah. I love seeing this, because you've got a minute 20, because you have the 20 from the fourth set, but you're going right into some kind of active recovery component. Their cardiovascular output is going to give them at least, 80 seconds to recover from that. And then you're right back into it again. I think that's fantastic. The amount, I'd be curious to see like what their output performance is the next 4 sets, now that you've given them that, extra bit of work, of rest, in there to the work ratio on the other side.
Yeah. And it's pretty, I don't quantify it in like a cycling class, but I can tell that people have, it's like, okay, they go too hard for 2 minutes, then you give them a little break, then they have that ability to finish really hard. And I'll talk about it too at the end about why it's so important to kind of use some of this timing and set it specifically. And this is the Copenhagen protocol, and that's the formal of the 2010.
Yeah.
And for people that aren't familiar with it, 30 seconds is relatively steady state. 30 using RPE, 30 seconds might be an RPE of 5 out of 10. 20 seconds might be an RPE of 7 or 8 out of 10. And then 10 seconds is an RPE of 12 out of 10. You know what I mean? And and if you do this right in 5 minutes, it's a good, the full study is you have 3 5-minute protocols in like 20, 25 minutes. But this is what I mean by doing, if I'm programming a class, Robert, I might do that 5 minute Tabata protocol. And then I'm talking about a conditioning class. And then we might do 5 minutes of bodyweight core training. And then I might do a 5-minute Copenhagen protocol. And then I might do 5 minutes of active recovery stretch. And that's going to be it. That's going to be like a 25-minute workout.
Nice.
But we're doing two 5-minute blocks of really hard exercise, and maybe 2 5-minute blocks of moderate exercise of bodyweight stuff. But it's really just trying to understand the programming with it. And then here's that variable duration, a ladder. You kind of see on the left is the percent intensity. You start with 20 seconds of work, 40 seconds of active recovery, 30 seconds. And as the work intervals go longer, the intensity, the output drops a little bit. Like, I don't anticipate somebody being able to sustain 100% work rate. And I tell them that we're going into a 40-second, you're going to do 2 40-second work intervals back to back with only 20 seconds of recovery in between. So I don't anticipate that you're going to do your hardest work, and I don't want you to. If I try to coach them up for these 40 seconds, I want you to go hard, but not your hardest, and really try to get them to understand that. And ladder, again, so in a class, I might have a Tabata interval. We might do body weight training. We might do active recovery stuff. Then I might have a ladder to finish class, and that's going to be it. I'm only going to do in a 20 to 30 minute workout, I'm only going to probably program 2 really hard blocks of exercise, and the other blocks are just going to be in basic core weight stuff. But if you make one of those blocks, the last block they do, that's what they're going to remember. That's where they're going to walk away going, "Woo, that was really hard," And that's really where we don't need to gas them.
On the Copenhagens there, Pete, the recovery is a 10-second as well. So they're 30-10, 20-10, 10-10.
I don't do any recovery. I don't do switch. So we go 30, 20, 10, then we go right into the next 30-second cycle, because that 30 seconds is kind of like a recovery of itself.
I see. Okay.
Yeah, so that way they finish 10 seconds really hard, then we drop right back into, okay, now So say we're doing an indoor cycling class. It's like, all right, 30 seconds of flat road. Let's increase the gear. Let's increase that resistance. Now we're doing 20 seconds. Let's increase that resistance one more time. Now I want you to stand up and go really hard for 10 seconds. And then what we're going to do is back that resistance off and go in the saddle for 30 seconds of steady state flat road. That's how I use. This is where I like using this a lot in indoor cycling because it's easy to control. And you can go 30 seconds flat road, increase the gear, 20 seconds with gear on the flat road, increase resistance more, come out of the saddle, work really hard for 10 seconds, and then come right back into the saddle. So it's an easy transition period for indoor cycling. That's really where I love using this one.
Nice.
And then the equipment, I just want to acknowledge this is some of the equipment. Obviously, I'm a Stairmaster guy. These are the different pieces of equipment, made by Stairmaster. All of our Stairmaster stuff is HIIT, but you can do it on any equipment, right? And the one thing I'll say about I'm a big fan though of, if you look at the lower left hand, you have this is the Stairmaster HIIT bike, and this is our new HIIT rower. But rowing machines, Concept 2s, the assault bikes, anything that you get the upper body working together, you're going to increase energy expenditure. Like anytime, and I kind of, the Box Masters, our boxing piece of equipment. I kind of call boxing like sprinting for the arms, right? Because a lot of times we sprint for our legs, but we don't do anything with the arms. But heavy ropes stuff is sprinting the arms. Now, real quick, bodyweight solutions here at calisthenics. So you can do this stuff at home with jumping jacks. So you can do jumping jack. Traditionally, we do jumping jacks, arms and legs moving together. But when I was taking when I went through the Gray Institute, we came with all kinds of variations. Like I might move my arms in the transverse plane while my legs move in the frontal plane. Nice. I might split my legs forward and back in the sagittal plane while moving my arms in the frontal plane. So you can kind of come up with some variations of jumping jacks, again, getting the arms and legs moving together. And one of the things we've been doing for core health and fitness is we've been putting up almost every day. Different master trainers have been putting up workout videos. And one of the workout videos I did was a Tabata, alternating between jumping jacks, body weight squats, mountain climbers, and push-ups. 4 exercises and rotating through. Do 20 seconds each. That's going to gas you. And lateral bounds, that's a technical term. They're what a lot of people call ice skaters. Hey, running in place can be a great, but you have to do proper form. And I don't know if people can see the video, but it's always funny. I try to get people to drive from their elbows so their elbow stays bent, and you see people bend their elbows. It's like, no, you're not drinking. You're driving those. You wanted people to drive their elbows back. So you try to get people. And then step throughs are. I'm a big fan of step throughs, except it looks like you're breakdancing. I can never breakdance in the 80s, but if I do step throughs, I at least feel. I just can't do it to any rhythm. Awesome. Here's some basic pieces of equipment, and these are pieces of equipment that I use in my book. But these are very easy to buy, except I've heard, I don't know if you've heard this too. I heard Perform Better is basically all out of rubber resistance.
They're pretty much out of a lot of stuff. I know they've been searching, like even just the door anchors that we've had. I've had 4 different clients end up with 4 different anchors than they originally had. So I think they're trying to kind of pull and get stuff from wherever. But yeah, they're the ones that I use them for everything and anything we can get. And we were early on with this whole COVID action to have our clients act and get stuff. So we were, pretty good with it. But from what I understand now, they're out of a lot of stuff.
Well, a couple of companies I work with, Robert, their factories shut down. China shut down their factories in mid-January. So from mid-January till the time COVID hit us in March, nobody was producing anything in China. So if it wasn't on a boat, if it wasn't in a container on a boat in early January, we're out of stock. So factories in China are just coming online the last 2 or 3 weeks. And even then, certain factories might be up and running while other factories might not be, depending on where they are, what province they are, and everything. So we are going to be out of supply chain. Like, I bumped into a friend of mine the other day who works for a equipment manufacturer. He said they're pretty much out of equipment because people have been coming to them. They'll take old treadmills and stuff and refurbish them and sell them to secondary fitness and home markets. Okay. And they're basically, out of equipment. But this stuff, the only thing you can't get at a Target or a Walmart are those 2-arm bands. And I'm a huge fan of those 2-arm bands for all types of strength and metabolic exercises. But this is equipment you can easily get at home, and you can easily do different exercises with at home. And people realize that if you haven't tried to do if you want a good 20-second interval, do squat to overhead press with dumbbells for 20 seconds, and that's going to gas you.
We did them today. They're my least favorite, but they work so great.
But they work because so much of your body mass is working. Absolutely. And that's the other thing is, say you only have a 10 or 15 pound pair of dumbbells, well, just do more repetitions to fatigue. Remember, I mean, we want to create mechanical or metabolic overload. And so just do repetitions to fatigue is enough to get the overload going.
You're
So
probably much better at this than I am, but I have a really hard time talking and and doing at the same time. And you have more experience at it, but when I'm doing a squat and press, I can't coach, I can't speak. I'm just like, guys, just let's get through this, and I'll tell you, I'll coach you on the next one. It's just they're so difficult.
yeah, that's just been, right. That's just, I've been a group exercise instructor for years, and that's where that those worlds kind of collide. So this is one thing, Robert, you kind of alluded to this earlier. This is the flow state, and this is one thing that, how many times have we been in a workout where we've totally forgotten about, like all of a sudden workout's over. Well, this is something, Csikszentmihalyi, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi is his full pronunciation.
Oh, wow.
He's a psychologist actually up in Claremont, McKenna. He identified the flow state 30 years ago. And this is what, so when athletes get in the flow, you're fully immersed in the actions of the present moment. You're fully locked in. This is why telling people it's a 20-second work interval, it's a 30-second work interval, why it's so important. If I tell you I want to work really hard for 30 seconds, I say you have 10 seconds left, I am giving you that expectation of how hard you have to work. Yeah. That can help put people in the flow state. That can help trigger, that's a flow trigger of telling you I want to work your hardest for 20 seconds and give people, all right, we got 6 seconds left, we got 3 seconds left. That way they know they only have a specific amount of time. What we're trying to do is we want people to bend but not break. When you look at if you look at the Red Bull teams, those athletes get into flow. I mean, they're in flow because they're challenging themselves. If you're going flying down a hill on a mountain bike, you know that you have to focus immediately on what's 2 to 3 meters in front of you. I can't worry about what's 50 meters in front of me because I got to deal with what's 3 meters in front of me. And that's really what we're trying to do in a class, right? That's where I can get people to work their hardest. If I give you a 4-minute Tabata, I can get you to crank out your hardest effort. I don't want you to worry about what's going to come later. I want you to focus on the next 4 minutes, and not even the next 4 minutes. I want you to focus on the next 20 seconds. If we can kind of set those expectations in class, that's where people will tell you, I didn't even realize how hard we were working. Is we're getting into, because flow triggers are dopamine, serotonin, adenine is another neurotransmitter. That's basically, this is how we use exercise as a drug. If we can get people into flow, we can exercise as a drug. There's a great book out there called Stealing Fire, which goes into the altered states economy. And I had one of the authors on the podcast a couple of years ago by the name of Jamie Wheel, and we talk about flow triggers. I had Csikszentmihalyi on. I had Csikszentmihalyi as a guest as well. He's a little bit hard to understand. He's Hungarian, so his accent was a little hard to understand with the interview. But really just understanding, if we can get people to get into a state of flow, we need to set clear goals with intensity, with time, with effort, and give them the feedback. We can create that flow trigger in our group exercise class. And that's also the other benefit of breaking it up in 4 to 6 minute or 6 to 8 minute blocks, is we let people know you're only going to work really hard for the next short period of time. I want you to work your hardest. It's only 4 minutes. I want you to do your hardest effort. After this, we'll have 5 minutes of body weight exercises. I'm not going to push you as hard, but I want to really challenge you for the next 4 to 5 minutes, and then we can go from there. And that's really, have you ever looked at have you looked at this in this format, Robert, of where you're really trying to initiate this and purposefully?
No, not specifically like this, but I really like the idea of that flowing component. As soon as you mention it, I'm like, I know, you know what I mean? You kind of connect the mindset to like, I understand that.
Yeah.
But I've never heard it presented or given the title of that before. My wife said it to me the other day. She's like, you're that student in school who knows the stuff and has experienced it, but doesn't know what the name of it is.
Yeah.
But every one of you I've spoken to this week, I'm like, I know that. I know exactly what that is. Now I have a name for it. So I dig that.
And this is the flow state. And one of the coolest things that Stealing Fire, that book is Stealing Fires by Stephen Kotler and Jamie Wheel. And they start out with the Navy SEALs, right? Because that's what, if you look at what special operations training is doing, is special operations training is trying to get you out of self and get you into a team, into a cohesive unit of where you're not thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about the needs of the unit. And so with every mission they do, that's a very, the way they train and the way they operate is a very flow driven environment, because they're trying to get into everybody working together. And like the reason why I have the Red Bull team on there is their first book, Stephen Kotler's first book, The Rise of Superman. He documents this team about what they're training. When they're training to jump through, they did a base jump off of, it used to be called the Sears Tower in Chicago, and now it's called something else. But the members of the team we're talking about, like if you're the first guy in the Red Bull team and I'm the guy following you, as soon as I saw your right foot move, I know I need to be doing something. because that's how closely they work together. That's how tied in they were. Because as soon as I saw your foot move, I know I need to get ready for my turn to get ready to fly, because they jumped off. They did a base jump off the Sears Tower and then flew down through. They did these wingsuits down through the cities of Chicago to land. I mean, it's really gnarly stuff.
That's cool.
But that's what big wave surfers, mountain bikers, all these guys they operate on. Is they operate in the flow state.
On the flow
So
state.
create your HIIT. This is how you create a class or create a workout. Is you have to look at what equipment you have available. Do you have dumbbells? Do you have a kettlebell? Do you have a band? Or do you just have body weight? And what protocols? And I always look at kind of like, I might do one Tabata protocol. I might do one variable intensity. And then I alternate. We do a warm up. We might do one Tabata block where it might be, I'm not going to push them to go their hardest. Then we do about 5 to 6 minutes of body weight training. And then we're going to finish off with another protocol where I really try to gas them. And that might be, and then we have a cool down. That might be a full 25-minute workout.
Mm-hmm.
And people might go, well, we didn't work, the research, and I'm sure you're well aware of this. I mean, the research on HIIT is less is more. And I just interviewed Martin Gabala, and I'll be posting my interview with Dr. Gabala next week. But Marty has done all the research, a lot of the research on HIIT training that we all use. And Marty, time and time again in his lab, 10 minutes is all we need. A little bit of a warm up, 4 to 5 minutes of high intensity, a little bit of a cool down, and we get a good 10-minute workout, and that can be enough of what we need. Now, would I tell you to train for an ultra marathon like that? Absolutely not. But staying at home right now, that can help maintain our fitness level. So obviously, there's the stuff. There's the podcast I've been talking about. We do have this. We do have a HIIT. We do have a HIIT program online by Stairmaster. That's we also have a Schwinn program online. And we are just getting ready. The cool thing is, this is kind of like a highlight of my career, right? Is I'm getting to work on Stairmaster and all this equipment, and Stairmaster and all this education. And we're just finishing up. We're in the final review right now of our Nautilus. But in another 2 to 3 weeks, we'll have a Nautilus strength coach program up online to really kind of reintroduce. This is the 50th anniversary of Nautilus this year, so we're really trying to reintroduce. Or our goal was to try to reintroduce. We had plans for Ursa and FIBO this year that kind of got thrown out the window. We're going to be kind of relaunching Nautilus machine circuit training this year, just because it's the 50th anniversary. But there are a lot of benefits, and especially for an older population of people in their 60s, people should be doing heavy strength training in their 60s or 70s. But unless they have great form, not necessarily barbells, and that's where machines come in really beneficial. Yeah. So machines don't trump other things, but in an ideal world, I'd have people do like 2 days a week of like the type of training you do, and then 1 or 2 days a week of machine circuit training, to kind of alternate that. Yeah. If you ask me if I were going to develop a studio from scratch, I'd want the studio to have a TRX component. I'd want a machine circuit training component. I'd want either a rowing machine or like the salt bike component. And that would be kind of like the full on, that would be the perfect studio, right? Is because then you could do your high intensity metabolic day, your lower intensity body weight day of the TRX, and then you'd have your machine training day to get the overload, the mechanical overload. And
we've been trying to get the space next to us for a few years now. We have a first right of refusal on that, and we are trying so hard to get that spot. I want to do some turf and have some space in there where we could do some sleds and all this, but I also want to have some space to put in some plate loaded stuff and have some some set machines that we could do some heavier guided lifts on with that, because I do think it has its place. For what it does. I just don't I don't have the room for it. But
it's the room and expense. That equipment is expensive, but at the same time, the benefit about using machine equipment is it lasts for years. They're if you maintain it well, if you invest in a couple of machines, your members will get a lot of benefit out of it. Because when you look at it, what machines do is they focus the mechanical loading directly into the working muscle. And that's what Joe's realized with his cam and everything, or any machine, your Cybex machines. It's what you're doing is you're loading specifically into the working muscles. Whereas, free weights, we know there's dissipation and load and different force curves and all that fun stuff. But yeah, my book is, in my book, I go through metabolic conditioning, I go through mobility training, and I go through core strength training. And there's a podcast. And like I said, I'm working on my second book right now called Ageless Intensity: How High Intensity Exercise Slows Down the Aging Process. So, nice. And the interesting thing about this, and Robert, I don't know if you've realized this, but up until the mid 2000s, because it was the mid 2000s when CrossFit started exploding in popularity.
Mhm.
But up until then, most of the research on high intensity exercise was specifically for an athletic population.
Mhm.
They would look at high intensity exercise like Tabata, Izumi's research was on speed skaters, right? It was on working on aerobic capacity of speed skaters. So all the research up until about the mid 2000s of high intensity exercise was really focused on an athletic. How does this influence an athletic population? But then about the mid 2000s, when more the general population started doing high intensity exercise, since about 2004, 2005 on, the research has kind of expanded to look at high intensity exercise for health benefits. I don't know if you've seen that. It's been like, as I'm going through the research for the second book, I'm like going, oh wow, there's a huge split here
Oh
of
yeah.
where prior to in the 90s and before, the research of high intensity stuff was specifically for sprinters, football players, rugby players, whatever. But since about the mid 2000s, it's been like, how does high intensity exercise apply to the general population?
One of the best components of CrossFit and their marketing campaigns has been introducing that to the general population, because I don't think a lot of people even knew what it was. You were either doing LSD cardio, long slow distance, or you were just lifting weights in a combo of the both. So yeah, it was definitely a groundbreaker that created all kinds of different formatting and programming, and
Oh yeah.
has led to what it is today. So
Well, think about it. Think about it from this standpoint. I mean, how many gyms did you walk in around 2000, 2001 that had Olympic platforms in them? They're like
yeah,
I knew one gym in the DC area where I was living at the time. And that was like a special powerlifting gym out in the boonies that
nobody
had
had
an Olympic platform.
kettlebells or sandbags or anything. It was all machines or dumbbells.
Yeah,
It
and
was
now
barbell
you
fit.
go into almost any 24-hour, you go to any big box gym,
Yeah.
and that they probably have multiple 2 to 4 platforms in there. So that's been a good stuff. So well, I can take a few. Let's do if we have anybody with any questions from.
Well, I know we had one on there. I don't want to keep you on here too
No,
long.
yeah, because I'm so busy. I
Heidi,
got so many places to go. Right?
Heidi threw a question up here on the aerobic exercise decreases in risk for dementia and Alzheimer's. How long, what type, and how hard? Just to give some direction on implementing that. That was your slide back there with the brain lifting weights.
Yeah, and actually the different studies have been like between 30 and 45 minutes of just steady state. And that's where that one that Medina references, book Brain Rules, it was specifically 2 times a week. They did 2 times a week of 30 minutes at a time. And as I was kind of as I'm going through this stuff for my book, I'm gonna hold this up. I don't know if anybody can see this. This is like some of the stuff I have on my desk right here. This is a meta-analysis of aerobic exercise on BDNF. And what they're finding is, again, anywhere between 20 and 40 minutes of steady state aerobic exercise can be beneficial for elevating levels of BDNF. So for now, like where I live in Carlsbad, California, I see more people walking around my neighborhood than I ever have. And if you go out and walk at a brisk pace for 30 or 40 minutes, there's a definite, not only a health benefit, but a cognitive benefit as well.
Absolutely. And then Beth put a post up on here just saying thank you for being here. She's got to go run off to run some errands for a client of hers, Beth
Cool.
and Tell. So she wanted
okay, cool.
to know
Yeah,
she was saying hello.
Yeah,
Well, we
cool.
really appreciate it, my man. Thank you for spending so much time and putting this whole thing together for us. This was very cool. I look forward to your book. I love the podcast. How many episodes have you done now? Or you're over 100?
I stopped. Well, apparently iTunes likes it if you don't have the numbers up front. I
Ah.
probably have over 230 episodes, I think.
I remember seeing something over 100, and I was like, "Wow, this is."
Yeah, you were guest number 80 something a couple of years ago. I need to have you back on now. I'm going to kind of circle back and have a few people on. So, especially, dude, I mean, you're doing awesome stuff with your programming, man. I love when you write about your programming, because you're right. There are a lot of people out there that don't realize that the older adult population has a great response to, can have a great response to high intensity training. They just have to be progressed the right way, right? You don't start your clients at the highest intensity, but if they're with you for 6 months, then you can start, how to push them, and how to push them safely.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate it, Pete. I'd love to come on, man. Anytime you want me, let's do it. So thank you very much. I appreciate everybody being on with us. We'll have the recording posted out here in a bit. And then Pete, are you cool sending me this PDF slide so people can view this? Cool.
Yep.
I'm going to do a big Dropbox to everybody at the end of the week. So probably on Sunday, I'll mail that out to everyone.
All right, man. Hey, thanks for having me on, dude. And thanks everybody for staying on and giving me somebody to talk to other than my dog.
Good. You're a good man. Thank you, Pete. Take care.
Yeah, take care.
Bye, everybody.